Okay then, the French social model. It is part of national identity and pride. People are very proud of it. It means basically their social security system. They fiercely defend it against the outside influence, which can't be good. And when they say that, it means liberalism from the United States, globalization, or the German and the UK models, because they introduced tough reforms, cutting down benefits, and trying to get people back to work, even if jobs are not so nice and if the salary is not so good. So the French people, for the majority, don't want this. So they're defending their social model against all these terrible outside models. There's another thing I noticed once I was preparing, and I have this problem sometimes when I try to translate French thought or texts. There's only one word to say what the Americans and the English speakers have three words. You have the word political, policy, and polity. In France, you have only one single word, it's politique. And it can be a noun, like le politique, the politique, or it can be an adjective, like political parties or political whatever, or policy making. It will always, there's only one word, so it gives you an idea that there's something very cloudy, very big and very important, something providential about the politique. I think the very much politicalized debates about social security and this fierceful defending of the French social model is very much connected to the political system. There may be a factor coming from the political system. The it is a presidential regime with direct election. The winner needs to have 50%, more than 50%. So we have a two-tour presidential election, everybody votes, and a very strong right and left divide. So everything is very much politicized because everybody elects the president and the president has a lot of power. So I think this may be one explanation of many problems. Now, why is France such a wonderful country? The Germans have a very old saying, dates back to maybe 100 years, to say life is very wonderful, it's good, you have a good life, and they say you live like God in France. Yeah, so here you have an example. The longest life pensioners have as a pensioner is in France, it's 28 years. There's no other country, there's Austria, now in Japan, after you retired, after your real retirement, men tend to live in average 14 years and women 22. So that's a huge difference. Here you have the middle, the average of the OCDE, and here of the European Union with 19 member states. That's without all the Easterners. So this would be a sort of picture of how good life is in France. Once you're retired, you have nearly 30 years in average to live. Some people 40, because some people die earlier. That is the average here. Now, the real age at retirement for men, I took a few statistics, put it together with France to show you about France. I made a difference with Japan. The real age in years, the evolution between the last 50 years globally, it's 4 years less in Japan, but 8 years less in France. These are the retirement age today in Japan, nearly 70. The real retirement age, and in France it's not even 60. So the legal age here is now exactly 61.2 years, because we are in a transitional period. It used to be 60 and it has to be 62 in 2017. It goes up a few months every year. So now this year we are at 61.2, you can get your retirement paid out. In Japan is 65, if I'm right. So that means Japanese people carry on working more than 4 years afterwards, and the French I stopped nearly 2 years before. So according whether you like to work or not, you choose your country. So this is what I said. A 2010 reform, which is really recent, put up the retirement age from 60 to 62, but only years later. And in the private, the same reform imposed in the private sector that if you want to work longer, your employer cannot throw you out. It's your will, up to 70. After 70, it's employer who can decide. But this is not so in the public service, you have to go. Now, and if you try to do a reform against it, then this is the response of French people. Against this reform, 2010, we had huge demonstration all over the country. This is a picture from Toulouse. This is not Paris, it's just a small, medium-sized town. And a few years later, when President Hollande started to reform, it was the same thing. There's this reform thinking going on. So here are the official slogans, but I listened on the television in those days, last year, and what people said who were interviewed, and they said, we are defending here our right to life, because there were many young people also. We don't want to lose our life earning it. That was the reason of the demonstration. So, but still the reforms will come because there's no money left. I showed already this picture at Kansai University. You can see here the social expenditure taken all together in France as percentage of the BDG. It's very high up. This is only the social expenditure. It's more than 32%. And here you have Japan, about 10% less. And this line, it used to be Britain, but it is similar to the European average. You can take it as a European average, this line. So France has a very high social expenditure. It spends a lot of the riches which is produced in social whatever. So this is where it goes to. Old pensions, here are the billion euros. I mean, the interesting figure may be this. And this one, you have around 700 billion euros spent every year on social expenditure. That means 672 billion euros are paid out as benefits. And then you have to add the costs of running the system, which is not very expensive, 6%, and you come up with more than 700 billion. Now, how is it shared out? This money, this one, goes more than 45% into old age pensions, nearly 35% into the healthcare system, family, and then the rest is much, much lower, as you can see, 8.3 for family and maternity, 7 and something for employment measures and unemployment allocations, housing 2.6, poverty and inclusion 2.5. Now, and here you can see this expenditure, this part here of the social expenditure is stabilizing because we have done already 2 reforms and there will be more in the future. Reforms is something like the value point of retirement was not evaluated but stopped, so that's a way of making it less. The French healthcare systems was stabilized, the expenditure, because we had this famous ONDAM, the limited budget. That's the conference, and the regional health agencies, what I talked about last time in Kansai. Family and maternity is a bit is stabilized because benefits for very rich families were lowered, but only for very rich families. And there were no new benefits added. Unemployment is stabilized. It was a little bit reformed, except for the very poorest populations. They get even more than before under President Hollande. And for housing and poverty, there are higher benefits now under the present government, but they are sort of limited to very few poor people, and the whole mass of the money concerned is less, so it doesn't really change very much the budgets. So this is a general picture about social security spending and social policy, even outside the social security arrangements, but sort of social spending for everybody or for poor populations in France. Now the financing, where does the money come from? Well, first of all, there is a big shift going on since years. First we didn't notice so much, but now we have the evidence, from social contributions to taxes. So we are moving slowly, and now we are sort of halfway from Bismarck to Beveridge. In 87, 90% of all this money which is distributed came from social contributions, from what is taken on your salary and is paid by the employers and the employees. 2013, that's the latest figure I could find, it is only 55%, the rest is taxes or tax-like contributions. So the social model becomes very hybrid. It started with Bismarck and it's sort of slowly going through to Beveridge, but only in part. There is a lack of political courage to really do a big reform. There's always talk about it sometimes, we have to reform all of it, but nobody really dares to do it, and you have a sort of hybrid model, and it gets more and more complex. Now, to put it down into a few figures, 54% are still today contributions, and it is the most of the part is pensions, which are still shared between employers, the contributions between employers and employees. Then you have about a quarter, 26% coming from government, from central or local government, and that's mainly for poor people or the minimum income, the allowances for long-term care outside the medical expenditure, allowances for handicapped people. That's local responsibility, and it's paid by local taxes. And then you have 20%, which is a very funny thing, unique in the world. It's called general social contribution. In fact, it's a tax, a social tax. It is the insured people now, they don't pay contribution anymore, they pay a social general contribution. That means a tax on all income, on their salary, on if you have an apartment and you rent it, and even on social benefits you have to pay this. So it is really a tax, but they didn't dare to call it a tax. So they called it a general social contribution, but it is a tax. So this is where the money comes from. But there's one point I should add. There's money which is spent, but it comes from nowhere. It's not written in books as a public debt. And the public debt is, well, it was reduced. A few years ago, we had 50 billions per year and euros. And now, the last year, it was 7. That was a big victory. We only have 7 billion debts this year. And it's hoped to go down more because there have been little cuts and more control. So anyway, the accumulated social debts, it's not the public debts, it's the social part of the public debts, is today 230 billion euros. That's a heavy debt for the future generations. And personally, I'm a little bit unhappy about it because it's not really right to do this. What are the alternatives? There's a lot of discussion about alternatives since years and years and years, but they lack consensus. Difficult to make a new policy because the left and the right don't agree, and even inside the left they don't agree, inside the right, and then if something is more or less agreed, then the functionaries come and say it's administratively impossible because, and institutional things and the legal things, and the lawyers come in and explain it's not constitutional. So anyway, there's consensus on the fact that we need a big reform on how the thing should be financed. We should have more finance on general taxes and less on work-based contributions, because French labor is very expensive because of all these contributions, and that's not good in the globalized world. But all the scenarios that were worked out, so over time, and each of them is somehow solid, with some advantage, big advantage in each, but there's no consensus, they're all contested. They can't make consensus on it. There's a social VAT. The idea that was President Sarkozy was, why don't we tax consumption more heavily and give this money to the social security? Then everybody will pay according to his means, because he consumes according to his means. But that was contested, especially by the left. Another idea is to change the contribution which employers pay. They pay still on the salaries. They still contribute on a Bismarckian basis. And it penalizes industries and business which uses a lot of labor. So they say, why don't we put it on technology? Tax the added value, plutôt, rather than the salaries. But there's also no consensus on it. And then a new idea, and probably this one will probably go through with, not immediately, but in a few years, because it concerns sort of the normal people. They are not very much organized to fight it, to merge together this general social contribution with the income tax. The general contribution is taken directly from your income, salary and sent to some offices by your employer. Or if you're a pensioner, it's taken from your pension directly and sent to some office who collects social contributions. The income tax you pay at the end of the year. Now they're making a project that income tax should be taken directly, probably in 2018. We will see if there's a new election and new powers what will come, but it's sort of in the networks. So the idea was to put it together because it's the same basis of taxation, but it would require first a major tax reform because the general contribution is not progressive. It is different rates on different things. It is 70 point something on your salary, it's 8 point something on your pension, it's 15 point something on money on income from capital. So taxes normally are not calculated this way. And the income tax in France is not progressive enough, so, and it produces very little money. I will show you about this also. So that it would need a major tax reform first.